No, he needs to be, turn the thing on.
So what do I do? What do I touch? This?
Is it blinking?
Yeah.
Yes, hit it.
Start the recording.
Okay, I'd like to call the meeting of the Budget Committee to order. It's Thursday, May 4th, 2017, at 7 PM in the Aldermanic Chamber. The clerk, please call the roll.
Vice Chair, Alderman at Large Laurie Wilshire. Here. Alderman Brian McCarthy.
Present.
Alderman Michael O'Brien is present. Alderman Sean McGinnis is absent. Alderman David Shoneman.
Here.
And Alderman Ken Siegel.
Present.
And also in attendance is our chair, Richard Dowd.
Present. Okay. All right, so this evening, we're going to be doing the budgets of the public library and the education. And as per our other meetings, we'd like you to focus on an overview of your budget and what's gone up, what's gone down. The things have stayed the same. Probably don't need a lot of explanation unless somebody from the Budget Committee wants to ask a question. So the first budget to be discussed is the Department 179 Public Library. The revenue is on page 51, and the appropriations are on 2018. Come up, take a vacant seat, and give us your names and positions in the library. And
Thanks, Skip. How you doing?
Muddy Waters apparently is in attendance.
good evening.
Good evening. I'm Arthur Barrett. I'm Chairman of the Library Board of Trustees.
Okay,
And I'm Jen McCormick. I'm the library director.
welcome. And when you speak, try to get as close to the mic as you can so the public can hear. Okay. Give us your presentation.
Very good. So our budget came in slightly below the mayor's recommendation of no more than a 1.4% increase. Included in that budget on the salary and overtime lines preserves all of our current Sundays, so we'll be open 33 Sundays next year. It includes a contingency for possible negotiated increases. We've started contract negotiations. The current contract expires on June 30th of 2017. It also includes filling three currently vacant part-time positions, 2 part-time reference librarians and 1 part-time janitor. And the part-time janitor is particularly important because we did open the new wing and there's a little more pressure on cleaning. On the operating side, we did reduce the amount budgeted for physical materials, for books and DVDs and CDs, mostly due to decreased use. So I think it's probably common knowledge that our circulation of physical items is decreasing somewhat. Circulation of electronic items is greatly increased. So in balance to that reduction in physical materials, books, and media, we increased funding in our technology operations line, and that will fund a new digital magazine product, as well as we're hoping to start accepting online payments of fines, which is helpful for customers if they can free up their account from home without coming in and use our online resources. You'll see there's also an increase to our hardware maintenance line. That, for some reason, that's the name that's used for our integrated library system, and we're going out to bid for a replacement system this year. We've been under contract. This is the last year in a 7-year contract, so it's time to look for what's new and available. There's a final increase to our subscriptions line. No, I already talked about that's digital magazines. You'll also see increases to our buildings and ground budgets. I'm hoping to use those funds for improvements to the theater and the image gallery. New flooring, hopefully some new lighting in the theater, as well as some new sound system. We did receive a donation from DCU this year in the amount of $7,500. So we'll combine both city funds and donated funds for those improvements. There's a similar increase to the equipment line, and we're hoping to use that for new shelving. We've moved our media into the Stearns room. We've moved magazines to the Chandler wing. There's some changes in the children's room. So new shelving, we're hoping to use those funds to pay for that. And really, those are all the changes. With this budget, we're open the same number of hours with just a few more part-time people, can keep doing the great service that we're doing. With the 2 part-time reference librarians, we're looking forward to participating in some of the activities at the community center that the city's working on, as well as hopefully some outreach into other areas of the community.
Okay. Ready to accept questions from the committee?
Oh, absolutely.
Alderman Siegel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I think the library does a great job, and I appreciate it. So I have 2 questions. One is informational, just for me. How is that microfilm project going? I mean, for a long time, you were trying to archive that.
Yes, so we have 40 years or so of microfilm digitized and online. We're working on and soliciting quotes for the next chunk of that.
Okay.
So I think we're up to like 1954.
Okay, thank you. And one particular line item, the 54-100 line for electricity under property services. I'm curious, you folks had a request and the mayor's proposed reduced your electric line. And I'm curious how the mayor decided to reduce your electric line and you didn't.
That's actually, thank you for bringing that up. And I don't know actually if Chairman Barrett actually heard this. We were told to budget an additional 10% for electricity for this year. I got a call from Janet Graziano, our financial manager, saying that whatever changes the city had anticipated to their electrical contract this year were not happening, so we did not need to budget for that 10% increase.
Okay, thank you very much. That makes sense.
That was my question too. Any other questions? No other questions? I guess that's it. Thank you very much.
Very good, thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
The next budget that we'll be discussing is the education budget. The revenue's on page 56, the appropriations are on page 250. Mr. Farrington, who do you want to bring up? Would you please introduce yourselves and your position for the record?
I'll start. George Farrington, President of the Board of Education.
Robert Hollowell, member of the Board of Education and Budget Chair.
Connie Brown, the Interim Superintendent of Schools.
Welcome. Thank you very much. Let the record also show that Alderman Marianne Melisigolia arrived at 7:09. Okay, who's going to lead off?
Well, I will. A couple of sort of pieces to set the table before I share with you what I think is a centerpiece of this year's budget proposal. We sent ahead the account increases and decreases that were greater than 10,000. Just want to make sure that that was reviewed and received and reviewed by everyone. We can certainly talk about that in more detail. I would note that of significance, again, our out-of-district tuition line continues to grow. We can talk more about that as we get closer to that line. That's up by $718,876. But I think to start this in a very positive way, what I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about the centerpiece of our budget this year. So my public technology skills are week. So let's see if we can make this go. Just use the arrow key. Okay, thank you very much. So we are looking at a 1.9% increase. The difference between the budget that the board passed in early April and what the mayor has proposed is $100,000 at this point. So back in November, the Board of Education agreed on one goal. It was voted 8-1, and that it would be all students will read and do mathematics at grade 3 level by the end of 3rd grade. And essentially that became my marching orders for the preparation of the 17-18 budget. So as part of that, I developed priorities that I thought would support the board's goal. The first is the expansion of all-day kindergarten to Nashua schools. And if you have been following the legislature today, the House did pass funding for all-day kindergarten that now goes to the House Budget Committee. Good evening, Mr. Donovan. Thank you for coming. I'm going to
Gotta
sweat a
show
little
that,
less now.
Mr. Donovan, the financial officer of the Nashua School District, arrived.
So a second goal of mine is to attract and retain the best educators possible. One of the challenges that I recognized when I came to Nashua was the difficult salary schedule for the Nashua Teachers Union. And what has happened is that over time, because of the economic challenges in the city, the schedule has really been torqued and tweaked so that now there's not a one-to-one correspondence between a teacher's years of experience and where they are on the step schedule. And as a matter of fact, it's really quite off. So you have teachers with 7-8 years of experience on step 3. And what happens with that is when you look at the people who leave Nashua, I'm talking about classroom teachers, to go to another district, it's largely because they're going to a district who has a one-to-one correspondence between years of experience and where they're placed on the salary schedule. And in fact, half of the teachers who left last year left for that reason. We also need to accommodate increased needs in special education. The budget provides for an additional preschool. There's an increasing population of preschool students here in Nashua. We have to serve students as young as 28 months to age 21, and that group is growing. We also have increased needs in the speech and language pathologist. I've proposed adding another position there, and to accommodate our increasing number of English language learners. If you look at the trend lines in Nashua, there are trend lines that are going up at a fairly good pace. Special education and ELL are two of those trend lines that are increasing. So let's see, up. The right arrow. I will get it by slide 30. So this is how I propose doing all-day kindergarten here in Nashua. And I think it's fairly creative. The senior team at the superintendent's office took a look at the goal, took a look at staffing, and figured out a way to implement all-day kindergarten in what I believe is as cost-neutral method as possible. So I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. Kindergarten's been around for a long time, since the late 1800s. If you go to an all-day kindergarten program, you get an average of twice as much instructional time. No aha there. And one of the things I've done, just as a footnote here, is I've cited all the research that I've included. So if you want to look it up, you're certainly welcome to do that. Teachers spend more time on academic activities, more self-selected activities. The reason self-selected activities are important for kids is that they promote greater and long-term learning and outcomes. Kids spend more than an hour a day on reading as compared to half-day programs, and they spend twice as much time on math, social studies, and science. So just for fun, just as a side note here, I used to sub, and one of the places, I didn't do it here, but I have subbed in kindergarten. And I thought I would die, quite honestly, before I got out of there because of all the things that they were trying to do in the window of time that they had. And if you talk to classroom teachers, and I have talked to the teachers here in Nashua, if you only have 2.5 hours and you're trying to get in a packed curriculum, there are some things that get short-shrifted. And often it's social studies, math, and science. So all-day kindergarten or full-day kindergarten would give Nashua the opportunity to really bump that up. 80% of all-day kindergarten programs spend more than 30 minutes a day on math. Teachers read every day to their students, whereas 62% of only half-day teachers do. Students enrolled in all-day K perform better in reading and math. And what I found was that the findings are not confined to just disadvantaged students. One of the things that I should note is that Nashua does have all-day kindergarten in 5 of its schools. In the Title I schools, you have all-day kindergarten and have had it for quite a while. We think it's time, I think it's time to level the playing field and move that initiative into all 12 kindergarten class, into all 12 elementary schools for all of the kindergarten kids. Another population of students that's growing in Nashua are those kids who are eligible for free and reduced lunch. And we have kids eligible for free and reduced lunch in all 12 elementary schools. The percentages vary, but there are kids in every one of those buildings that are eligible for free and reduced lunch and would benefit from all-day kindergarten. Kids who are in all-day K receive better grades in literacy and math, learning skills. There are statistically significant differences with all-day kindergarten. And you can, if you look at some of these studies, you can control for things like time on task, grade level, sex, class size, the presence of an instructional aide or a para. All of those things are helpful, but none of them will give you the same benefit that an all-day kindergarten program will give. So the long-term academic outcomes, I know there's been some discussion regarding whether this sticks or not. The research I looked at said that kindergarten has strong positive long-term benefits. Here's a study that they looked at, and they tracked kids through grade 8, and they found that the kids outperformed their half-day peers in mathematics, writing, spelling. They did better on all-day testing. All-day testing. They did better on standardized tests. In Philadelphia, they tracked kids into grade 4. They found that, again, the kids had better grades in reading and math. And then in Anchorage, Alaska, they did a longitudinal study, and they found that kids in grade 11 had better grade point averages than kids who had been in a half-day program. There are also some social benefits. One of the things, if you talk to kindergarten teachers, is missing right now in a half-day program is letting kids be kids, letting them take time to play, letting them take time to learn how to be good school citizens. And by being a good school citizen, some of the kids who come to kindergarten have never been in school before. They don't know how to line up. They don't know how to take turns. They don't know how to share. Those are all really important social benefits that you learn in school. And you need time to be able to do that. Attendance improved. One of the challenges that we have here in Nashua is attendance, getting kids to come to school. I mentioned a minute ago, better long-term adaptive social and behavioral outcomes. So one of the things that will prove for you, I believe, economically to benefit the city are you're going to have fewer kids that have to repeat and fewer kids who are going to need special ed services. At the beginning of this presentation, I told you that one of your trend lines that's going up is the need for special education services. Any educator will tell you if you get kids early and you can do an intervention, the chances that that student won't need services down the road is greatly improved, that they won't need remediation. All-day kindergarten is an important step in that direction. Kids are less likely to repeat first grade. The third bullet here, an 8-year longitudinal study found both special ed and grade retention levels were lower for all-day kindergarten students. Philadelphia, larger than Nashua, but similar in demographics, found they saved $2 million for every 1,000 kindergartners in improved retention rates. When you have a student repeat, you have to have essentially another year of that student in school. There's a cost to that. So other benefits, ELL kids and African American students significantly outperformed their peers. Teachers and parents' perceptions both felt there are numerous benefits for kids, both academically and socially. Parents love it. They felt their kids were provided with a comprehensive, developmentally appropriate curriculum. They believed their kids learned more. Teachers like it. They felt that they could individualize instruction, expand the curriculum, more time to develop listening skills, and that it produced more literate students. And as I said at the beginning, all of this supports the board's goal to have kids on grade level in third grade in reading and math. I couldn't find any negative outcomes associated with kids' attendance, and the research supports that. And the last one from the Education Commission of the States, it's clearly a promising tool in the policymakers' arsenal for improving schools and closing achievement gaps. So what we tried to do is move the discussion with the Board of Education from why do we need it to how's it going to work here in Nashua. So here are the current kindergarten enrollments. I won't read down through those. You can see what they are. And so we have 338 kids in title schools, non-title schools, 342. So we've got just about half of the kids attending a full-day program right now. So we think, and we're in the process of collecting enrollments for kindergarten next year, that we're going to get about 100 more kids in the schools to take advantage of a high-quality, full-day kindergarten program. So this is how we're going to do it. We're going to take existing staff and we're going to cover the kindergarten classrooms as proposed. And we believe by balancing those classrooms, we can make that cost neutral for Nashua. Kindergarten class sizes are capped at 20. We've projected 840. We think that's high. Class sizes will be around 18 and a half, 18.6. And if we need to move, an overage happens now. So if I have too many kids for bicentennial in kindergarten, I may have to assign some of them to Maine Dunstable, or I may have to move kids between schools. So that will continue to exist. One of the things that I talked about at the beginning of the proposal for all-day kindergarten was busing. And after a long debate, decided that it's best to get the program going. We currently don't offer busing, and consider busing perhaps in the 18-19 school year. But I'd really like to see the program get launched, and then we can think about perhaps busing students at a later date. Professional development is key. We will commence planning for a 2-day summer institute this summer. We were able to get a Title II grant to make that happen. We've already got, I believe the count was today, somewhere on the order of 30 teachers signed up to do that professional development. And in large measure, that PD is going to be teachers working with each other. As I said a minute ago, we already have nearly half the schools who have all-day kindergarten. We want those teachers to help teach the others what works and where we could all benefit from some discussion about how to do this for all the kids in Nashua. The time is right. By repurposing existing FTEs and classroom space, we can offer all-day K and all 12. We think the budget impact is minimal. I've budgeted, I think it's like $34,000 for supplies, anticipating that we may need some tables or books or chairs. We're going to do the best we can with what we have by repurposing things. And the Board of Education has approved this. So we're moving forward. And that concludes the PowerPoint. I'd be happy to take questions on that piece of it before we delve into the numbers.
Okay, before we get other questions, I'm going to make the assumption on the electricity going down that you were asked to do 10% and then the mayor said less than 10%.
Mr. Donovan?
On the electricity, we signed in a 3-year agreement. But it doesn't kick in until I think November. So we're expecting saving on the supply side.
Because before we had heard from the library that they told them the budget at 10% increase, and then they came back and said it's not going to go 10%. So
Yeah, no,
are you separate?
Yeah, we're
All
separate
right,
on that.
Okay, thank you.
We have the advantage of having our own
Get your own
financial officer
generator.
to help us figure those numbers out. So.
Okay, questions from the board.
Just about the kindergarten.
Alderman Shonin? Oh,
Mr. Chairman, I had some questions about the presentation. I appreciate the presentation. Going back to, I think it's page 2 or page 3, it says National Board of Education goal, all students will read and do mathematics at grade level by the end of 3rd grade. How are we doing right now? How is this problem uncovered, basically? Where are we at and how are we measuring it before we do this?
I think that it is an area that we can certainly improve in. When we took a look at the kids coming into Bicentennial, Maine Dunstable, who were reading on grade level, the numbers were pretty startling of the number of kids who were not on grade level entering kindergarten and entering first grade. So we think that we need to reach all the kids coming into kindergarten, and having a full day will give us a step up in that direction.
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Follow up? Yes.
But then, by the end of third grade seems to be the goal that we're trying to change here. So where's Nashua at in its third graders at, how many of them are at grade level and how many aren't?
I would be happy to get that data for you. I didn't bring that with me.
Okay, I'd like to see it. I think it'd be good to know what our baseline is, because anytime we're doing something, we need to be able to look at it years hence and see that there's a change. That's the reason we're doing this, and we should be able to see it. I believe it's going to be there, but I'd like to know where we're starting and compare it to where we're going to end up. So if we could do that, that'd be great. I had a question, too, about retention. Mr. Chairman, may I continue?
Yes,
Thank you.
continue.
Retention, what are our retention rates in kindergarten and first grade now? How many kids are held back, and is that a problem in this school? If there's savings from reducing the retention rate, what's our retention rate?
What I would like to do is, again, get that data for you, because I did not bring that with me.
Okay, that's fine,
Okay, you want to follow up with another question?
if I may.
Okay.
And as we're pulling teachers out of, or repurposing teachers, what was the criteria for choosing which classrooms could give up a teacher to go to the kindergarten program? How did that work?
We currently have classrooms with less than 15 kids in them. And it's for a variety of reasons. The students may have moved out over the summer, but we are rebalancing classrooms and repurposing those individuals to help, we think, keep class sizes reasonable in all grades and move those teaching positions into all-day kindergarten.
What are our classroom size goals?
In kindergarten, I believe the goal is less than 20, and then it varies as you go up through the grades.
Okay, I do want to give other people a chance, but if
Okay.
you want to come back, you have just one more, or?
If I could just, and I'll leave the
All right.
topic on class size. There are state standards and there are standards that are specified in the union contract. Where are we at compared to those standards? Are we trying to stay within those? Are we trying to hit those? We're trying to come in well below those class size?
So can I take that one?
That's fine.
So our standards in the teacher's contract are in general stricter than the state standards, minimum standards. Probably the exception is at the high school where it's 30, which I think that's the state, same as the state. We have been trying to target as close to 20 in the K-3, and so there's been an effort to try to maintain staff in the elementary schools so that we can keep those grades within balance. I mean, our goal always is to have the lowest student class size that we can have. We pay a significant overage through what I would call some bad contract language many, many years ago. We pay a penalty if a teacher has an extra student over the number that's in the teacher's contract. There was a time period where there were significant overages many years ago, like in the $100,000 or $150,000 a year being paid out. That doesn't happen anymore. It's very, very, very infrequent that happens anymore. So we are trying to keep those class sizes at a minimum.
Mr. Farrington, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just to expand on it a little bit. We have students in our elementary schools, 4th and 5th grade, that are 1 and 2 years, and in some cases more than 2 years behind their respective grade level. And so the hope here, and of course, when you have a teacher who's dealing with children, 22, 23, however many children, that with that wide a spectrum of abilities, it becomes more and more difficult for them to teach those children and bring them along, to try to bring the others, to try to catch them up. And so by keeping class sizes smaller, that will help. That is one of the things that we do to try and make it easier or more realistic for a teacher to deal with that situation. Part of the thinking in this kindergarten is that we will reduce the number of children that fall in that category because we give them that better start early on, and we have fewer children who are a year or 2 years behind. And we have some, what I think is some pretty good testing. The iReady tests that we use are seem to be very accurate in determining where children are, and we can catch them earlier, find out the pieces they're missing, and move them on. So I think we can absorb a little larger class size. As Dr. Brown was saying, she was able to move some teachers around. If you don't have such a wide range of students in those classes, then the teacher is better able to deal with the students. And so I think we can fix it earlier rather than continue the way we're going and just constantly try to remediate problems in the fifth. And of course, it's even worse when you get into middle school and high school.
Okay.
Mr. Dale, can I
Any
just,
other- oh,
can I also respond to that? I was just digging through my email because I had the number that you were looking for. So at the third grade level over the entire district, there are 845 students in that third grade level, and 252 of them are one or more grade levels below the third grade reading level.
Just one other thing on, my history goes back with the Board of Ed, I hate to say it, but more than 16 years. Actually, Mr. Farrington was even before that, so. And I don't know where that language came in, but I do know the reason for it, having been part of negotiations over the years. And that is that at one point in time in the history of Nashua, the teachers were afraid that they were just going to keep piling on students, and they would have, so many students in their class, they wouldn't be able to teach well. So the language got into the contract at some point in time, but I'll bet it's been there at least 16 years. Any other questions? Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you. Thank the chair. I'll throw the question out there. You did mention this is a very new program with kindergarten as it comes in, and it's what rise to anticipate there may be an overage in one of the school communities, and you said that you do change that, but how do you make that decision on which particular students, get moved to another school community in that vein? Is it a lottery or something?
No, what we do is we staff in the school according to the anticipated enrollment, and it's usually students who come after the beginning of the school year that would need to be placed in a different building.
Okay.
Alderman Melizzi-Golia.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Hollowell, do you have, out of these 252 students, how many might be ELL students?
I don't have that. No.
Okay, if we could have that number, that would be helpful. Thank you.
The specific question, ELL in kindergarten or total school?
Of the 252 students that weren't reading
Are
at
reading.
grade level,
Oh,
how many were
okay.
ELL
Right.
students?
Okay. Any other questions? Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you. As a former player, can you explain the reduction in the hockey program? I just was noticing that. Yeah.
So it's not a reduction this year in the hockey program. It's a reduction in that line item because last year there weren't enough students who wanted to be on the hockey program. So what would have happened is it just wouldn't have run. And instead we teamed up with Pelham. So it's a combined team, and that allows both schools to actually run the program. So that was actually, it's a good thing. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had the program because we didn't have enough to field a team.
Okay. Anyone else? Oh, Alderman Siegel, you,
Well, I want to understand, are we going to start talking about the budget? Because we've been speaking about kindergarten, the kindergarten presentation. So I don't know if they have a separate presentation on the budget. Normally you do, but nope.
Well-
We don't.
Okay,
these are the line items that change. You got that, right?
I saw that, yep.
Okay.
I have questions, but I don't know. I mean, it seemed like we were just focusing on
No,
kindergarten.
it's the whole thing.
Seemed like we went to hockey, so seems
Yeah.
like it's fair game now.
All right.
That's certainly not in kindergarten. But Mr. Donovan's here to answer any of the questions on the
So I
budget
can
as well
start
as
asking
the.
questions about the budget? Awesome. All right, may I?
Yes.
Thank you very much. No, I'm just starting with the revenue sources. And one of the questions I have is that we have certain funding that the state gives us, I assume, and certain other funding for special education needs, SPED. And it seems to me that we have a significant shortfall between what the state is giving us or other sources of revenue versus Nashua supplied taxpayer revenue to pay for this. And I was curious if you had an idea of the magnitude of that gap, or if I'm mistaken and there really isn't a gap and pretty much everybody's paying their fair share, and Nashua just happens to be sort of a hub of excellence for dealing with special ed. Now, I already think I know the answer to that question, but I'd like to understand the magnitude of how far off we are from that nirvana that we all wish we had.
Mr. Donovan, you want to address that, or?
Well, there's a number of different areas. For example, the CAD aid, okay? So the CAD aid is a formula whereby if you spend more than 3.5 times the average cost of a student in New Hampshire, then the state will cover 20% of that cost. Once you hit more than 10% of the average, they're supposed to cover 100% of the cost. So that's the basic formula for CAD aid, but they never have enough money, so they turn around and then give you a percentage. So typically that percentage is between 68 and 74%. So that's the amount of money we get. So that line item, which in 2017 was 456, we're estimating it to be about 343 for next year. Actually, no, the actual number last year was 300,000. So that all depends on the number of children that reach those levels, but the state never funds the full 100% there. And when it comes to most other of the special ed costs that we are required to do as a district, we certainly don't get the funding. A lot of those are mandates from the federal government as opposed to the state government.
I understand that, and if I might,
Continue.
that's a big problem that I'm sure we all have that people don't seem to recognize, that unfortunately our budget gets eaten away by mandates that are kind of silent killers, shall we say. And Nashua is penalized, I think, for doing such a good job at trying to help those less fortunate, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of sharing. Okay, that sort of answered my question, but I have a specific question now about an interfund transfer from the School Impact Fees Fund, which is, again, it's 49760 line, and that is on page 56, and it's listed as $200,000, which is fine, but when I look at the amount of money that's in that fund, it's $115,326. So where's that money coming from?
That's a good question. That's the one line item that I basically budget with help from Rose Evans at the city, because the impact fees do show up as school revenue, but that money comes in from developers and things. So I don't really even see it until I look at the amount. But I did, when put this budget together, I said, what should we use for that amount? And they suggested the 200,000.
But the problem is it's transfer from a fund which only has $115,000 in it. So
that fund will receive more money during the year because whenever we give out building permits for residential, there's a component that goes into the school impact fee.
and I do understand that, but that's a lot of impact fee money, and it was hard to ignore that. Normally transfers from funds are the trust funds are at least as funded as the transfer is. And I understand there's other instances where you're expecting money coming in because it's quarterly and you're looking at, say, a March 31 endpoint for these documents, but I guess I don't see that here at this point. So I just point that out. That was a little bit of a problem I had. So that was the issue I had on the revenue side. I'm a little skeptical just about that. I just don't know. That's a lot of impact fee. Historically, that would be very high. I mean, if you look at what's on the drawing board for Nashua, I guess I don't know where that would come from.
But I would suggest that it's been 200,000, between 175 and 200 the last 3 to 4 years, and that amount has been met, so.
Okay, that's fine. Just noticing that. So moving to the budget line items, and I appreciate all the work you guys put in. I'm not going to try to pretend to, parse your budget and everything that goes on in the school district, the expertise you guys have. So I'm going to ask some questions based on just looking at numbers and seeing differences, and so, I don't purport to be an expert on the workings of the school system. But one line item, again, this is on page 249, the 51,200 line for paras really went up between 2017 and 2018. I'm just curious, were we backfilling other positions? What happened where paras just skyrocketed up?
Yeah, what you have to do there is take a look at the paras full-time and the paras part-time. When you add the paras full-time and part-time for last year, it's 386. When you add the full-time and part-time paras for 18, it's 388. So even though on the 51100, it shows the increase, that if you go to the part-time, the 51200, you'll see where it went from 8 up to 28.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the full-time equivalents numbers. So
but you put the two together, it's only a couple different.
Okay, all right.
So it means there's a shift between full-time and part-time, right? So, and that varies from year to year as to what you need.
Fair enough. I don't want to take anyone else's time. Give anyone else a chance if they have questions.
Alderman Shoneman, did you have another question? Or? No. All right, anyone else? Keep going, Ken.
Mr. Chair. The salaries and wages line, this is for my edification, on page 250, the 51,412 line, the wages per diem, is that substitute teachers?
Yeah, is that like $1 million or something? Yeah.
Okay, that was just for my edification. I thought so, but one thing it's hard not to notice, so I'm sure you wish it weren't so. We're now on page 251, the property services lines, where we have buildings and grounds maintenance. It was 268, and it's now gone down to 243, and that's all of our buildings, our capital plan. It's a fairly significant amount of money, and yet, sadly, copier maintenance is at 157.7. So it's like 60% of the amount of money that we spend on all our buildings, at least on this, we spend on copiers. Now, that's not to say we shouldn't have copier maintenance, but I guess overall the problem we have, and we've talked about this before, is it's kind of like the break it and bond it way of doing things, where there's not even remotely enough money put into maintenance, and we wait till things just completely decay, and then we spend $10+ million per school to kind of say, well, looks like the HVAC system needs to be done, but now let's just go through and fix everything we never maintained and give it a certain amount of time, not maintain it, and then bond it again in a vicious cycle of lack of maintenance. And I just wonder if there's anything we can do about that. I mean, anything. I don't even, it just seems unfortunate. And we have it at the city level too. It's not endemic to the school system. This is something we've complained about at the city level. What do we do?
Mr. Hollowell would love to entertain that question.
Well, so first to Mr. Donovan, that's not the deferred maintenance account though, right, that
No,
he's
the
looking at?
Right,
So there
deferred
is,
maintenance is a different line item, but
and that's roughly,
that's 200,000 in this budget, and
Correct.
that's where we've hoped for that 600,000 as a minimum.
right. So a couple things. So there's the deferred maintenance account, which actually rolls over, right? So that money can actually stay. So Sean Smith has some money that he does do those things with. Probably almost 6 or 7 years ago, when Mark Conrad was here, we did an analysis to figure out what we needed, like what's the minimum, and that's a number like $600,000 in deferred maintenance, and we've never gotten close to that. What did happen in the past was when we had, when the school capital reserve account had significant funds in it, we would often get about $300,000 from the city, and we'd use another $300,000 from the school capital reserve account to sort of try to keep up. But that was not possible anymore. That fund, which, you know, was made when the high schools were created with excess funds from the high schools, is now down well below $1 million. And so if you thought the problem with deferred maintenance, because what we were doing is we do maintenance by requesting from the Board of Aldermen that money comes out of that deferred maintenance account. So we do some roofs, some pavement areas, things like that, where we'd come to you and it's a small amount of money coming out, or maybe $400,000 or $500,000. We don't have that well to go to anymore. So that was another way we were trying to patch the maintenance. So barring there being some solution that comes from this body or from the mayor's office, we don't generate that kind of revenue that we can make an account that would take care of those things. I mean, I will say, I think it's taking us too long to get around to do some of these schools. It can be a method of, it's not the most efficient method, right? But it is a method of making sure that the schools are up to date. I think we have to look at those schools and say, at what point does it not make sense to invest in certain buildings if you've got a smaller group of people, right? So that's the only other way you can do it, is to reduce the amount of buildings that you have to manage.
Just one thing, we have 18 schools and a few other buildings that they have to be concerned about. If you do the commercial analysis on how much you should put aside every year for infrastructure to maintain those buildings, you'd be shocked. It's between $1 and $2 million a year.
That's not shocking.
Yes, Alderman Siegel.
So, Mr. Hollowell actually alluded to the next point I was going to make, and which is, I'm glad that you mentioned it and that you've probably been thinking about it. But we have buildings, and I'm just going to use this as an example. I'm not signaling anybody out, but Mount Pleasant, only because it's come up. It's clearly one that needs to be addressed in short order. I mean, it's actually almost unhealthy, it would seem. I don't know that for a fact, but it's got issues. And is there a discussion where at a certain point, you know, these older buildings with this huge amount of money we want to put in, maybe it's time to say, you know, that's maybe not worth it.
Mr. Hollowell?
Take that one. I'll take that third rail. So we are doing an analysis of both Mount Pleasant and Elm Street at this point, because those are the next two schools on our list. When Superintendent Brown came in, she suggested that we should also do an educational analysis, which is so you do a functional sort of engineering analysis of what you need to do, and then you look at what goes on there in terms of education. What other refinements do you need to make? The contractor is looking at that now, and when we get that number back, that'll probably initially come to the Finance Committee, and that's probably the first time we'll have a real number, because right now we're just using guesses as to what we need to do to Mount Pleasant. Mount Pleasant does have significant issues. It's interesting because it's a solid building, right? It's the frame of that building is very, very strong. But all the things you got to do inside in order to make it to a standard that it can be a school is what's going to drive the cost up. So I think it's something, I'm not going to speak for the whole board, but I mean, I think every time we go to do one of these, we do think about whether that's worth, then you also have to figure out, okay, what's the alternative? So if you need to have, like if there isn't space to move those students somewhere, well, now you've got to build another building or add on to a building you already have, and so does that make sense, right? But that'll be in the discussion next year, probably.
Okay, I appreciate that. I mean, none of these problems are easy, and, you know, I don't mean to I hope I'm not coming across as critical, because I know how hard they are, but you do have to wonder. I mean, we've seen some of the larger issues associated with some of these schools, and it's just overwhelming, the amount of money that, just to rehab a building that maybe, even after it's rehabbed, becomes still not optimal.
Additional questions, Alderman Siegel?
No, I guess, unfortunately, it's not like I can say, well, let's cut this, let's do this, let's move X, Y, or Z. I think you guys have done the best job you can. It's unfortunate, there's some numbers, I have a note here, woeful, HVAC maintenance, for example. And I'm concerned that $162,000, because I mean, I just hope that we're doing the most basic things, like making sure it's maintained so that the air quality going through there is at least okay. That's just not a lot of money to spend on all those buildings, unfortunately. Not like I'm looking to spend money, but, you know, it's like what happened with our road system. You know, we played games a long enough time, and then all of a sudden, now we have to spend $7.5 million a year just to get the road system up to the point where, you know, had we done normal maintenance and everything, we wouldn't have the problem. And it could be worse, you know. If we didn't do it, it's really going to be bad. So I just, I don't have a good answer for that one either, which is unfortunate, because I'm not a big fan of complaining without solution. So.
Having,
If you come up with a solution, you know our phone number. So
Yes.
happily
I will
take
I
a
will.
solution to that.
You bet.
having spent my entire career in logistics, it's a pay me now, pay me later. You put off spending $100,000 today and bond for $1 million a few years down the road.
I wish it were just $1 million.
Hypothetical numbers. But. Alderman McCarthy.
I just wanted to follow up on, want to actually give a little more or different information on the School Capital Reserve Fund. The origin of the reserve fund is when the Claremont decision was reached and the state adequacy grant was put in place. Our school tax rate dropped by about $4 a thousand in the course of 1 year, and rather than have that entire rate drop out, we elected for 2 years to put about $10 million a year into the reserve fund, with the thought of offsetting some of the costs from the high school, which was about to begin construction at the time. It turned out it didn't make much difference in the annual budget to offset 20 million out of $100+ million of construction in that time. So what we did was to use part of it to offset bond costs in the worst years of the high school bond, and then the rest of it was left there to deal with some of these other issues that came along. But there has never been any sustainable plan to replenish that fund. So it was a $20 million windfall that we got because of the Claremont decision, and we spent it on schools over the years.
Alderman Siegel?
I appreciate Alderman McCarthy clearing that up. Is there any possibility of relief on the horizon for this explosion in special ed costs? I mean, you look at the transportation cost alone, it exceeds that for all the rest of the students. It's unbelievable. And I know these are federal and state mandates, but is there anything on the horizon, help forthcoming? This is like this thing that's silent behind the pension obligation is the thing that gets all the publicity. But this is like a knife coming up from the bottom. You know, it's exploding. $1 million+ increases. Incredible. Anything on the horizon?
Well, the short
Alderman-
answer is
Mr.
no.
Hollowell?
You know, in the short time frame, there's no legislation, there's no, I'm not even sure there's a great awareness at the State House that this is something they should be tackling. Probably
should
more
have
so than
stopped
many
with
of the
it.
other
There's not a
things
great
they
awareness at
tackle.
the State House. Would have been enough.
We have done some things where we try to maintain services. We actually have 2 teachers of the deaf, and the reason we have 2 is partially because we needed them for our students, but also it allows us to take students from other districts, right? So deafness is not it's not, you know, autism, right? So it's not a high rate, but because we have enough students, we can bring in some others. I will tell you there are some simple things the state could do, like when we provide those services for some other district, we're capped at a different level than a private person would be, because the state often has to pay that cost if it's a court placement. And so they have an incentive to cap us because it's cheaper for them, but there's no rationale for it. It basically means it's a disincentive for us to keep those programs and make them so that they're more regional. So it should be that we actually get rewarded for that, and instead we get penalized for that particular service, right? Makes it harder for us to do it for the community. I'm a strong believer that trying to do that, in whether it's, you know, Manchester may have a strong program in one area of special ed, and we may have a different one, sort of regionalizing the special ed services so that they stay in the public schools, which is just cheaper because there is no limit to private vendors. Basically, they can charge whatever they want. And we have some students that need these services, but you know, they're in excess of $200,000 a year. Now, we're a big city, you know, think of small cities that have those students come in. It's an enormous hit. And to your point, to Mr. Donovan's point about the way the legislature plays game with the catastrophic aid, what should happen is when it gets to a certain level, the community at large pays that, right? Which is what it was designed to do. And instead they play that game where they just say, well, you know, whatever the number is, we're just going to cut it by 30% so that it isn't bigger than the number we had last year. Well, that's nice. They can do that. We can't. So we have a reduction in catastrophic aid, and I can tell you we don't have fewer students that require high-level services. It's because the state skimps on those.
Alderman Siegel?
So has there been any outreach to the Nashua delegation to perhaps investigate this, like our own Alderman O'Brien on the Nashua delegation might be in a position to listen to what's going on here and perhaps introduce something at the state level to do something about it. But I have no sense for what happens at the state level on these types of issues, but this seems to me fairly severe and something worth investigating.
Mr. Donovan, did you have something to add?
Yeah, since you're sort of talking about state funding, if you look at the revenue account, you'll see a couple $1 million we get from state building aid. Wait 3 or 4 years, that's going to be down below $1 million. That's going to be dropping significantly. That program has been put on hold by the state, so they're just paying off the promises. But we have a number of those bonds coming due in the 2019-20 time periods. So we're getting about 2.1 million now. That's going to drop to about $1 million in a couple of years. So there's more reduction in revenue coming from the state.
Wow.
Alderman Shoneman?
Mr. Chairman, it sounds like we, as time goes on, we need to be maybe rethinking how we're delivering education entirely. If those kinds of revenues are coming down and costs are going up as they are, you know, we can't just keep on pouring more into it as a city. I think that it's pointing out that we need to maybe start doing things a little differently. I'm not sure what those answers are, but it looks like we got to start thinking of a different model maybe.
I would take an opposite approach and think that's about time the state realized that they're not getting enough income and funding what they're supposed to fund. We have a certain number of students. We have an infrastructure. That money supports infrastructure. If you can't let infrastructure go, to Alderman Siegel's point, at some point, then it would cost you 10 times that amount to replace it. You can't do away with schools. As a realtor, when somebody wants to come in Nashua and buy a house, the very first question they ask is, how are the schools? Very first question. Businesses, when they come into Nashua, how's the school system if they're going to invest here? So we can't let the schools have to meet certain standards, and you can't just ignore buildings and let them decay. So, and the state all too often promises money over time and then reneges. To me, you know, that calls for a change in Concord, not Nashua. Alderman Shoneman.
not suggesting we get rid of schools, so please don't apply.
That was good.
Well, that's good. I am suggesting that you may not be able to control what Concord does. There, right now, we're not controlling them, they're controlling us. And if you can change that reality, if you have a way to do that, by all means.
It's called election.
I'm sorry?
It's called an election.
Well, we had one, and these, these revenues to us are going down. That's the result. You mentioned enrollment. I can look it up, but what is our enrollment? How has our enrollment changed from last year to this year?
We're at
Superintendent?
11,103 kids.
I'm sorry, how
and
many?
11,103, and we're down, I want to say 104 overall.
Thank you.
Will that number balance out, though, with the kindergarten full day?
I think so. You know, Nashua is a relatively transient community. We see a lot of kids moving in and out, particularly in the Title I schools. So I do think we'll pull in more students because of the all-day kindergarten proposal. Dan, do you want to add anything to that?
I think
Mr. Dunnan?
we'll see some sort of an increase this year with the kindergarten, and then I think after the year, assuming it goes through, we have it for another year, I think you'll see another increase. But I think over the last 5 or 6 years, I think we've seen a decrease of around 80 students a year on average. But if the kindergarten could possibly bump that up. Many towns in New Hampshire have seen a more significant decrease than that. But Nashua, probably due to its housing stock, various types of housing stock, hasn't seen as much of a decrease in numbers.
Mr. Farrington, did you want to respond to that same subject?
Mr. Alderman Shoneman, go and see if I,
Alderman Shoneman?
I just wanted to just come back to the comment. I just think that we need to look at some way to deliver the product that people coming into the community want in a way that doesn't rely on the state money and that simply doesn't continue to ask the folks at home to kick in more. We need to make it better. That's my only point. Thank you.
Mr. Farrington?
it plays right into my comment. And it comes back to where we started, and it's not huge in the context of the size of our budget, but still, I don't think we should overlook the fact that Dr. Brown found a way that we could enhance our educational offerings that we have for our students in Nashua without increasing our budget, reallocating resources. And I think those are the kinds of things that we talk about at the board. There are certainly things that are out of our control. I think we had a student at the beginning of this year that came in that was one of the $200,000 category on special needs. And so that really, right there at the beginning of the year, really puts a dent in your budget. But I think beyond that, we talk a lot about how do we reallocate resources, or the things that we can do differently. And they're small things that we're talking about, like I say, in the context of a budget of our size, but still, we are trying to do that as best we can, and we're looking for other opportunities to do the same.
Hollowell?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So on the reduction in students, so there has been a significant reduction over, say, that if you look over the last 10 years, right? I mean, it was like 13,000, 10, 15 years ago. There used to be a lot of schools that had portable buildings next to them as classrooms for extra space because we were kind of bulging at the seams at some point. Most of those are now gone, and the ones that aren't gone, Mrs. Ziem convinced us to purchase about 5 years ago, and that turned out to be a very good deal because we were paying a lot more in rental than over that 5-year time frame. But the point is, we're trying to adjust the size of the schools to match the number of students that we have, right? Alderman Siegel's comment about, you got every time you go to upgrade a school, you have to look at, well, okay, what spaces are available? One of the other things that we'll be looking at shortly on the Finance Committee is busing. So there is one very large bus company that currently runs our buses. They do a fine job running our buses. But when you're the only player in the market, it's easy for you to kind of name your price. And they named the price that was much higher 4 years ago, and we were able to negotiate it down, even though they really didn't have to, right? We didn't really have an alternative. The only other bid was a company that said we could lease buses and maybe purchase them someday. It was a different model. But I think we have to look at those different models. Does it make sense for the city to have its own fleet of buses or to have its own staff in order to make that at least more manageable as we go forward? And that may not be the right answer. Mr. Donovan points out that there are some circumstances that happened when we did that RFP that maybe won't recur. But those are the kinds of things we have to plan for. That was an unanticipated, I mean, that's been in excess of $1 million over the last 3 years in terms of increases to the busing costs, and that goes for special ed in addition, right? So we try to plug as many holes as we can. I guess I hear what you're saying about trying to deliver services in a different way. I'm not really sure the construct you put around it can actually occur. So if you don't have, I mean, remember this, much of the state money that we get is really tax money here in Nashua that's going to Concord and then coming back here. So that is local money. There's some money that isn't that. I don't know how you get rid of a whole bunch of revenue and then somehow magically educate students who have to have teachers in front of them without having teachers or buildings for them to be in. And those cost money. And I don't know how to control those costs any much better than we're doing now.
Any additional questions on the education? Alderman McCarthy.
Yeah, I had one comment first on the buildings and what we do with them. Yeah, we ought to look sometimes at whether it's worth it or not, but unfortunately, unless we can get rid of the building, it's almost always better to renovate it than it is to replace it, because as Mr. Hallowell stated, they're all pretty solid buildings. It costs a lot to tear down and even more to rebuild the structure that's around them, plus pretty much the same amount to do the the mechanical systems that we replace would be pretty much the same if they were replaced or were built from scratch. So we can't, unless we can actually retire buildings, we can't gain a lot there. The question I had, and I used to ask this a lot, I haven't asked it in years because I never get an answer I like to it. I suspect I may get a better answer tonight though. In the long term, and this goes back to the question that Alderman Schoeneman asked, do we have a plan to compare results year over year to see whether we're doing better than we have been doing, and what does that plan entail in terms of what numbers we look at and what we expect for the results? Because I used to ask this, and the answer I would get is always, well, we just started with a new set of tests, so we won't have the same set of results 2 years in a row for another N years. And I'm hoping that's not the case now, and that we can actually decide whether we're doing better or worse at the end of each year.
Mr. Farrington?
We're away from construction. We're talking about what we're really all about is education.
Yeah.
And when we first got into this conversation about kindergarten, that was one of my concerns, and we have a couple of really good data people, and I went and talked to them, and they haven't got back to me on a final answer, but the question was, what do we establish for a baseline? How do we establish it, and what criteria are we going to use? And there are some problems with it. These folks are pretty smart, a lot smarter than I am at this stuff, but iReady is one of the things that we use that tests students at all these different levels, and it seems to be a pretty good tool. But apparently the thing gets tweaked every year, and so they're looking at ways that we can use that data, because clearly, I want to see kindergarten is the best example that we have here. I want to see that that is actually having a benefit. I want to, and the nice thing about the iReady examinations, among other things, is the fact that it is a good resource to help us define professional development that's necessary, because it shows areas that students are weak in math or language arts in the 4th and 5th grade, that we can go back to the 1st and 2nd grade. Not to pick on 1st and 2nd grade teachers, but we can go back and say to the teachers, and we can go right to a specific teacher if necessary and say, you need this, or we can look at a school that says, you need more emphasis in this particular area, we're going to have professional development on it. And so we are trying to use more and more data to be able to do that. And it is a problem, you know, because we did NECAP for years, and then NECAP went away, and so we don't have that baseline that we were using anymore. But statistically, it wasn't a really good baseline. That wasn't anything that I liked. The results weren't showing any improvement, and we need to show improvement, clearly.
Stallwell?
So the advantage of the iReady test is that whereas the NECAP tests at a certain level and can't tell you much about, either you get the questions right or you get them wrong, but it doesn't tell you what grade level you're at. The iReady test is designed to sort of, if you're in the 3rd grade level, it can see that you're at the 1st grade level, and so it can report back on that. Now, any test is fallible, right? So that it's not perfect, but we've looked at it now for this probably the 4th or 5th year that we've used iReady. And when I look at the data, and I look at lots of data for the work that I do, it seems fairly consistent. If the NECAP test bounces all around. It used to bounce all around all the time, and so it always makes me question a test when results change from year to year. The kids aren't that different. So I think, to answer your question, the iReady test is, I think, a very valuable tool that we can use. I think also the other thing we have to do is you have to try to change things in the school district that have the least number of other factors, because the big thing with education is there's 1,000 other things going on or changing every year, whether the state changes some requirement or they change the level of funding you get for teacher training, you know, right? So I think one of the reasons I like setting a goal at sort of the 3rd grade level is you're limiting it to students who really have at least have been in school long enough that things should have kind of evened out, right? And so if you can make a difference in kindergarten, or the other thing we're doing is piloting some of the stuff Mr. Farrington just talked about. So the iReady test allows you to look back. So if I'm looking at a student that's in the 3rd grade, I can go look and see how they did in iReady in 1st grade, and I can see what components of the test didn't they do well. Did they miss fractions? Did they miss geometry, right? So now you can then try to figure out, okay, well, maybe we should make sure the curriculum in 1st grade is better at those things, and that 3rd grade student, maybe he just needs some remedial work on fractions, and now he'd be able to move forward. So I think we're going to pilot something in 3rd grade, focusing on those 3rd grade students, and hopefully we see some sort of difference in the testing, right? So any test, if you get a big enough signal, it kind of bumps up over the error rate of the test, right? So that's what your goal always is to be able to get to that level. So I think you can be more hopeful than you normally are in asking that question.
Any follow-up, Alderman McCarthy?
I'm good for the moment.
Alderman Shoneman?
Thanks. I have a follow-up on that. I like that we're looking at data. I think it's important to look at it, and I appreciate when I look at it. Going back to the data that you mentioned earlier, 252 out of the 845 students, that was based on the iReady
Yes.
score for the, okay. And I appreciate having that. If it's possible, with the data that you're going to be providing, can we know what schools those 252 came from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can tell you roughly 150 of them are in the Title I schools, and about 100 of them are in the non-Title I schools.
Alderman Siegel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for the clarification for the audience, can you define a Title I school so that anybody who's watching this understands what that means?
So Title I funds are used at schools that have a high level of free and reduced lunch. So in our case, our average is pretty high, but we've still kept, certain schools are well over 70% free and reduced lunch, whereas say Bicentennial may be at 10 or 15 at this point, so much lower. So Bicentennial wouldn't get the extra funds, but Ledge Street, Amherst Street, Mount Pleasant, Dr. Crisp, and what is it? Fairgrounds are the Title I schools.
Any other questions? No? Oh,
Actually, can I make one other comment?
Mr. Hollowell.
You might be interested to speak with the staff over at Fairgrounds Elementary School who have gotten focus funds. So the state changed the way they did things because they was like, change things. I think in this case, they tried to identify a fewer number of schools that they would focus funds on. And Fairgrounds Elementary is the only school in Nashua that they did. There's actually like 4, I think, in Manchester that were focused. And they've had some incredible increases in their test scores over the last 3 years in the work that they have done there. It was pretty impressive the other night when they as to Alderman McCarthy's point, it's often when you get these things and it's just sort of a muddled answer, and it was not a muddled answer. They've made a real difference.
Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for coming in, giving the information on the educational budget. Okay. So communications,
There are none.
we've done the department reviews, unfinished business,
There is none.
new business resolutions.
There is one, R 17097, is authorizing the mayor and city treasurer to issue bonds not to exceed the amount of $1,200,000 for roof replacement at work at Fairgrounds Middle School and Ledge Street School Elementary School. There will be a public hearing and it's scheduled for 5:15 this year at 7 p.m. in the automatic chamber.
So I'd like to entertain a motion from one member of the committee pending to table R 17097, pending the public hearing scheduled for May 15th at 7 p.m. in the automatic chamber. Would someone like to make that motion?
Alderman Siegel.
Alderman Siegel?
Mr. Chair, I'll motion to table R 17097 to time certain at 5:15:17.
Okay, the motion is to table R 17097 to the public hearing on May 15th, 2017. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries.
We have another pending motion, R 17098, relative to the adoption of fiscal year 2018 proposed budget for the city of Nashua General Enterprise and Special Revenue Funds. There is a public hearing scheduled for June 6th this year in Nashua High School North Auditorium.
Again, I'd like to have a motion to table R 17098 pending the public hearing scheduled for June 6, 2017 at 7 p.m. in the Nashua High School North Auditorium. Mr. Alderman Siegel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can we just make a motion to table because we're discussing the budget, so are we technically, I guess do we have to table to a time certain or just table? Because we sort of remove it from the table when we discuss it. Is that correct or not?
I think the motion is to schedule it after the public hearing, so it's not that date. Well, it could be.
I think either way works.
Okay, I'll make a motion to table R 17098.
Okay,
Simple.
all right. New business ordinance?
We have to vote on it.
There is none.
Excuse me.
Oh, excuse me. We got to
Motion,
vote, yeah.
motion to table, R 17098, pending the public hearing. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Thank you. New business ordinances,
There are none.
tabled in committee. Is there anything that anyone wishes to bring forward that was tabled in committee? Seeing none, moving on. General discussion. Alderman McCarthy.
Just to put Alderman Siegel's mind at ease about the school impact fee, I've been looking at what it did last year, and at this time of the year, it was the total that had been brought in was about 100 and some odd thousand. In fact, in June, it was 100 and some odd thousand. In July, when we wrapped up the books for the year, the revenue to that account was 266,000. So I believe there is a tremendous payment to it in the month of June.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Public comment. Is there anyone that wishes to make public comment? Please come up one at a time. Mention your name and address for the record.
Good evening. It's not working. Hello? It's not working. Is it loud? Okay.
Yeah, it's on.
Doris Hohensee. I live on Swart Terrace. I'm a member of the Board of Education. I want to thank you for allowing me to speak this evening. I voted against the school budget. I didn't prevail. But I'd like to explain my reasoning, which may be of some help to you in your deliberations. First of all the studies on the presentation tonight are prior to 2010, which is when the Common Core standards were adopted. So even the longitudinal studies were far before the Common Core, which we currently have in place, and have no predictive value. There are many studies that indicate that there are very little gains from kindergarten that persist past the third grade. I oppose expanding kindergarten as it's currently configured because it uses developmentally inappropriate standards, which are harmful to children. No time was spent in committee reviewing or revising these standards. Kindergarten today is nothing like what you remember. Our teachers have reported that a number of our kindergarten children cry over their standardized tests, which are administered 3 times a year. Thankfully, the board voted to remove $8,000 in funding for these tests. However, last year, after the board voted to remove the funding, the administration found grant money to restore these same tests. The current obsession with testing is very harmful for our children. What many in this room may not realize is that our standards require kids to learn to read in kindergarten, not first grade, where most of you are taught to read. Not all children are capable of reading and doing math in kindergarten. Some can manage, but many feel a sense of failure and frustration, which can produce permanent aversion to school and learning. Young children learn by play, not by taking tests. Most of the current curriculum is desk learning, with little or no time for physical activity and recess. The results, particularly for active young boys, can be devastating. Studies have shown that accelerated learning for young boys has potential long-term disadvantages, especially in their ability to focus in later years. Delaying academics and high-stake testing until first grade reduces inattention and hyperactivity by 73% for the average child. It virtually eliminates the probability that they will develop an abnormal or higher than normal rating for inattentive, hyperactive behavioral measure, or ADHD as it's commonly referred to. I'm not opposed to kindergarten. I'm opposed to endangering children. The school board needs to take time to review the standards and revise kindergarten before we expand the program. Please think carefully before you approve this budget. Not all parents believe that the current standards are beneficial to their children. I've talked to many in our district and across the state because we use the same standards. The new Commission of Education is revising the standards. They will be revised by June of 2018. Even our tests, our Smarter Balance, those are expiring. So all of our benchmarks are changing. Everything is changing. It's an important issue. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak in public comment? Seeing no one. Remarks by the Alderman? Seeing none. No non-public required.
Mr. Chairman?
Do I?
Siegel, that is.
Alderman Siegel?
Motion to adjourn.
Got ahead of me. The motion on the floor is to adjourn. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. We're adjourned at 8:24 PM.